Hello, people. So, this is an interesting one. Made multiple attempts at this subject on a live. And it always has me pondering just how much power it has over my existence. And what's inspired me today is rather ironic, but I'm 17 floors up on the Gold Coast. My beautiful partner's got a conference, and I'm reaping the benefits of having this incredible space to work from. And for some reason this morning when I woke up, I just had this, just a memory of what it was like when I woke up in prison. So I thought I would use this irony, and I would use where I was sitting now to maybe share a little bit more of a specific memory on what Zimbabwean prison was like. I tend to glance over it. What I want to try and do today is talk about what I learnt from my time in prison and what I continue to learn now, post-prison. So in December of 2018, I was arrested at my office at about 6:30 one morning. They came knocking, and there were some immigration officials and a bunch of police. I was quickly scooped up. I'd made the mistake of not really telling anyone what the knock at the gate was about, so I vanished. No one knew where I was or what had happened. I got pulled into the African prison system very early. It was a case of trying to break my will. They wanted me out of the country very quickly because I'd upset some political heavyweights. And so, I was taken into some rooms and had some not so savoury attempts to break my spirit put on me. Safe to say they didn't know what they were dealing with. It's a little bit arrogant. And it was that arrogance right there that got me in the problem to begin with. See, I got a big mouth. I love to communicate, I love to talk, but I also am a little bit of a crusader. And in Africa, there is a lot of corruption, there's a lot of politics that has gone wrong, and there's a lot of destruction, theft, and I guess just complete lack of integrity. So, not being from Africa, I decided to go to war with that behaviour. And while running a rather large farming operation, I took on the theft and the corruption firsthand. I stopped it rather successfully. I stood up to it. I stood up to guns being pointed at me. I stood up to the death threats, and I won. The problem with African politics is that overnight it can change very, very quickly. So overnight, the Mugabe politics of Zimbabwe changed, and the people who were the low-level ringleaders became the top-notch head honchos, and all of a sudden Aaron became the brunt of their want to get rid of a white man on a farm, especially a big-mouthed white man on a farm, which I made myself a prime target for. So my ideal business and farm that I built became the target to have me shut down, destroyed, and shown that when you've got a big mouth and you tackle corruption and politics, you're not going to survive in Zimbabwe. So that's basically where my arrogance got me. And this is one of the big lessons I learned. I used to take my crusading as very much driven by this beautiful part of me that wanted to change the world and was going to leave a legacy and an incredible inspiration for my kids or people around me that knew me to stand up for what was right. The problem is when you stand up for what is right with arrogance, and when you start shoving your opinion down other people's throats, it doesn't matter how right you are. Sometimes the universe is going to teach you a lesson the hard way. So I ended up in a Zimbabwean prison, Harare Central Prison to be exact. And I'm going to slow down here because I tend to speed up a bit when I start talking about this experience. So I spent 2 days hidden in their system while they tried to break me and get me on a plane to leave the country. Didn't matter what they threw at me, I wasn't leaving my kids behind, and eventually they realised they're either going to have to put a bullet in me, which in Zimbabwe they just won't do, not for the crimes they'd accused me of committing. So they docked me into the real prison system, and they charged me officially with fraud. What else did they get me for? Fraud, immigration charges, and all sorts of other lovely made-up stuff that they could, all linked again to me upsetting the politics and stopping the corruption lies on the farm that I was running. So what happened next is, after formally being charged, I was sent to court. I went to Harare Central Court. I was thrown into the prison cells down there. Now, obviously, I was the only white guy. And when I first walked into those cells, I don't know if I'm going to say I wasn't scared. I think my coping mechanisms and the walls I put up didn't allow myself to feel scared, because I knew I was going to have to be very confrontational and incredibly strong on the outside not to get owned or have a serious amount of violence perpetrated against me. But I'll bet underneath, if I'm honest, I was scared shitless. I was surrounded by predominantly rapists, murderers, and pretty much quite a few heavy hitting of the Zimbabwean sort of mafia robbery, sort of armed robbery guys. Now, a white guy in prison to them in Zimbabwe is not what you'd think. I'm a dollar sign. So the violence wasn't so much as an outward threat. It was an implied threat that if you don't start smuggling in what we need, life is going to be very difficult for you. Sadly, again, my arrogance flared up, and I refused to allow that sort of thing around me. So I started swinging very early, and I guess the old adage that when you go into an environment like that, you basically pick on the biggest, strongest and ugliest as quickly as you can so that you can assert dominance. I'm very, very lucky that I managed to pull that off, because if I'd been anywhere else in the world in a third world prison, I think I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you on this phone right now. I was in Zimbabwe, and I picked someone that took the warning, and everyone else took the warning around me. In that moment though, and I can feel the sweat coming up now, it was one of the biggest gambles of my life. The guy was a Nigerian. He wasn't even a Zimbabwean, but he was in a Zimbabwean prison, so Zimbabwean rules. And I clean headbutt him, smack bang right in the nose. I've never really talked about the detail of that before, but like I said, this time through I wanted to go into the finer details, I guess, because what I want to do in sharing this is show people just what the human spirit is capable of. Now, you can look at me now sitting here on this camera. I'm 47 years old. And when I walked in there, I was cleanly shaven, wearing predominantly business clothes. So I'm not exactly the portrayal of your alpha male walking around who's going to start cracking skulls and hitting people. So I took a big gamble, and again, I think it threw them off. And I made sure that the tats could be seen. That was again, and the more I'm talking about this now, the more this was the fear playing its role, protecting me, finding its ways for me to puff myself up and look as big and fucking nasty as I could. Now look at me now and think about how big and nasty I can look. It's not that successful. That's why I felt I had to perpetrate the violence. It's why I had to split this guy's face open. It's why I needed to, because if I'm honest and you look at me now, underneath, there was a scared white boy walking into a black prison in Africa. Yeah. So after that happened, everyone backed off. I managed to get a prison guard to smuggle me about 4 packets of cigarettes. Now, it doesn't matter where in the world you are, cigarettes are currency worth more than money. Those 4 packets of cigarettes got me through the next 24 hours. I also kept people at a distance from me. It bought me some time so I could, I guess, understand where I was at. I didn't know at this point how long I was going to stay in for. No one knew where I was still. It still was another 48 hours before anyone found me. So I was on my own. But what those cigarettes did, and what that connection with that guard did, was allowed me to buy a little bit of time so I could find my feet and not run around throwing punches and splitting heads open to try and stay, because I wouldn't have lasted much longer. If I'd kept doing that, I was goner. So my first sensations of walking into Harare Central Prison, I arrived at about 7 p.m. after court that night, after being officially charged. And I walked in, and the prison was closed, so everyone was in lockdown, and there were these big doors, and I got led to a door, and I heard them speaking in Shona. They thought I couldn't understand them, and they were saying, put him with the Ethiopian. So it's all I knew. So as we got to the door, I could hear this booming voice behind the door, and it was loud. And when I say booming, look, it was a 6x15 cell with, at this point, probably about 45 guys in it, and I think we were about another 15 or 20 got thrown in. And when the door opened, I saw this guy, and it was not your typical Ethiopian. His name's Aeli, and he's a bear of a man, 6 foot, probably 1, and big, not what you're used to seeing too as a typical or a stereotypical Ethiopian. He's a Mara tribe, so he looks much more Egyptian, and that's for another live. As that door opened and he looked at me, he got the shock of his life, because not many white guys go to prison in Africa because they pay enough money and they avoid it. and it had been many years since the politics of Zimbabwe had allowed a sort of white man to go that far into the shit. And this is where my arrogance and my big mouth, how much trouble I'd caused for myself. And again, in the name of being a crusader, in the name of what was right. What was right for Zimbabwe is not my business, which I learnt the hard way. So as I walked in, I was basically allocated a bed. It was now probably 7:15. We had to do a count. So I went in. There's now 70 plus 6 metre by 15 metre cell. I got given a blanket. Basically was in there with a taxi driver who'd been arrested for assault. And he's turned to me in perfect English and said, "Would you like to pray with me?" And I had no clue what to say to that. I was still like looking around in the smell of this place. Already the cockroaches, it's nighttime, they're coming out. Just the overwhelming sense of where I was now and how long I could be there was starting to hit me. And I again had to keep that facade up. I had to keep those shoulders back. Every eye gaze was stared down with malice and with intent, so that every single person there would hear the story of what I'd done to the Nigerian and know to keep away from me. In saying that, I didn't know how far that bluff was going to carry. So I said yes. And, these guys are apostles in Zimbabwe, the Shona tribe. They have a very unique way of praying. There's a lot of song to it and a lot of ceremony. So this guy started praying. I didn't have a clue. I don't speak a lot of Shona. I understand it very well and I speak basics, but I never got into it enough to be able to follow this. And so he prayed, and I was on my knees there beside him, and then we went to bed. Just before I went to bed, one of the bigger long-term guys was given some instructions by Eli, the Ethiopian who I've learnt is the cell boss, to put some buckets around me. So I woke up and there's a guy putting like buckets around where I was sleeping, and they're like 25-litre buckets, and they're the longer-term cell guys. That's their possessions. That's where they keep everything they own inside this bucket. So they decided to put it around me, I guess, to protect me from what they called the rats and thieves. So night one, done. Night two, we wake up and I go out into the yard, and I start to realise I'm being summed up by, in this section, there was about 470 guys. And I'm in a section which houses a lot of refugees, war criminals and all that sort of stuff. So you've got guys from Burundi, Zambia, Botswana, South Africa, Congo, Ghana, you name it, from almost every single country, Central African Republic. If there was an African in there, there was one of every single country represented. So you've got an incredible array of cultures, a credible array of food demands, etc. Or you can demand what you like of African food. In prison, the only thing you're getting is a thing called sadza, which is maize meal, rice on some days, and then what they call relish. And the way it was cooked and the way it was served, I refused to touch it. So this was day 3 now. I hadn't eaten, and I was due to go to court again. So I thought I'd hold off and try and buy or bribe some chicken or some meat when I got to court. So follow through. That's what happened. I went to court. I got a piece of chicken and a handful of chips, and I got to eat that day. And I got some clean water. As it started to unfold, I was in and out of court sort of day in, day out. So the process of going to the courts early in the morning, getting a piece of bread, a cup of water, was pretty much just the average, and nothing monumental happened, except I also started to learn about how deeply steep the corruption was within the entire system. I knew it was because just to live in Africa, you're corrupt on a daily basis. Every single human being on the continent of Africa is corrupt. That's how you survive. Just to do the most basic of things, you are paying. That's just the way it works, not for us to judge or change. But I was being asked to bribe the public prosecutors, I was being asked to bribe the judges, I was being asked to bribe the guards, the prison officials, the warden. Every single person within that system I came into contact wanted a bribe. At this point, I wasn't paying anyone a cent. I didn't know who was who in the zoo, and you only pay the top dog because that's where you get your results from. So I just went into this mechanism of day in, go to court, turn off, come home. Now, one thing that was really noticeable in these journeys to and from court was the prison transport system. So these old prison trucks would take you to the courts and back again every morning and every night. You'd leave about sort of 7 in the morning and you'd come back about sort of 7 at night. They were built for probably about 30 prisoners. They were shoving about 70 to 100 in these things. But I'll never forget that first time I walked in, that smell of 100 guys all pretending that they're not scared, because these guys, even though they'd done it before, knew what they were in for. You know, I might have had a tough time of it. I had money. I had the ability to bribe. I had the ability to buy what I needed over time. Now that took about 7 days to get in motion, but these guys had none of that. They had no support. I was left in my work clothes. These guys were in clothes which half the time covered about 30% of their body in the tail end of winter. They were literally ragged. Some of them you could call it a shirt, and there'd be 4 ribbons of cloth that would be tied across parts of their body. They were hardly clothed. They had nothing. So the fear in that prison truck as they slammed that back door closed, and the 2 guards just stood there, and I looked at each one of their faces, and again, I had this real deep understanding of what fear is and what it does to a man and what it does to man in a confined space. Because then you started to see the bravado, then you started to see the attempts of violence. In a small space like that, your pickpockets start trying to work the prison van over. The guys trying to buy food, the sick guys trying to get their ARVs for their AIDS medication. There's all these guys. I've got epilepsy. Without my meds, I could have an epileptic fit and die, and the guards don't care. Then the mental illness you saw in there. There were guys in there who should have been in mental asylums. In Africa, they don't have such a thing. So these poor guys just talk to themselves 24 hours a day. I saw mental patients in that prison system that never slept because their voices never stopped. They talked and talked 24 hours a day. I had them sleeping 2 or 3 guys up from me, and they never stopped talking. And it never made any sense. And that's the sort of, environment I was introduced to. Trying to come to sort of notable places here, because it became a grind. Once you get into that system, it's amazing what the human body is capable of. Now, if we talk about that, a couple of things I wrote about what I really learned. And there's some big stuff in there, but you know what I really, really learned, and what I'm on here for today, is just how bloody strong I am. Because once I learnt that fear and I understood and I sat with it, I actually began to use it to feed, I guess, the parts of me that were lacking. You know what I mean? Like to bolster the reality that I was stuck in, there's nothing I could do. And so by thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about my kids and thinking about the hopelessness of what if I'm stuck in here for 2 to 3 years? What if I can't get food today? What if I can't? It all started to melt away, and I started to smile. I started to train the guards in close combat techniques. I started training some of the staff in it, and we turned our 6x15 cell into an impromptu boxing ring, and I started teaching them that, and then I started teaching them morning routine. We did boxing. We did all sorts of stuff in there, you know, and look at me. I'm not your alpha male. I'm not that what most people would ultimately look at and say this guy's going to do these sorts of things. So I learned how strong I was. But the beautiful part about that, that's not just Aaron, that's not just me. Every single human put in my position has a choice to do that. I'm no different to anyone else. And I think this is the big reason I get on here and I do these, is I want people to realize in that sense of hopelessness that you have, you are way stronger than you give yourself credit for. And it's not a fucking cliche, it's a truth. You just need someone to poke you and prod you hard enough, or a situation to enter into your life that is that harrowing sometimes and that scary that you're shaken loose of these beliefs and these thoughts that have gripped you for so long that you decide you want to change and you take some action. Now, I was forced to. I didn't have a choice, but how nice would it be not to go to fucking prison before you had to take action in your life? So that the thoughts and those beliefs and the things that are holding you back don't grip you so strongly that you spend 40 years in that place, and then you look back one day and then you look at your kids following exactly in your footsteps and go, holy shit, have I just chosen differently at that point in my life? And the other thing that blew me away, and this is one that you'll see more from me with my beautiful partner training to be a kick-ass health coach, is how healthy I was. I walked into a prison that had not been cleaned in 40 years. And when I say that, it hadn't been cleaned. The only cleaning we did was we would get a bucket of water and the floor would be wiped down with water. That's it. In the mornings. Cockroaches, all the other stuff would be swept out, and it would literally be swept out the door into a pile, and then everyone would walk through it and it'd end up being traipsed back into the cell. This is, like I said, 70 guys in, 6 metre by 15 metre cell. I didn't get sick in there. which is a goddamn miracle. I'm a white guy. I don't live like your average African. Now, I live pretty rough, and I was quite tough. I'd done my bushwork, my anti-poaching. I'd done my work in the field with elephants. I'd lived rough, but I was no African. I don't have the immune system those guys did. I didn't get sick in there. That is one of those simple things that I realised just how powerful. Because why didn't I get sick? I told myself I couldn't get sick in there, because if I got sick in there, I was likely going to die. There's no medical team, there's no response, there's no medicine, there's no doctors allowed in. And at early stages of this journey, no one knew I was there. So if I got sick, the way I saw it, was the end of me. So how powerful was my mind? Powerful enough to tell me not to get sick, and it worked. So it's one thing I tell a lot of people when they say, I am sick. Yeah, you are sick because you keep saying I am sick. I am depressed. Yeah, you will continue to be depressed if you keep saying I am depressed. I am anxious. You will continue to be anxious if you keep identifying and owning the I am. And if you can say I am healthy, I am strong, you can counter all this bullshit, these labels, depression, anxiety, bipolar, ADD, ADHD, all this stuff that you're being medicated for. These are labels that you're being fed that you can wrap yourself in so that you don't have to take on these challenges. Now, again, I'm not telling you to go get arrested in Africa and go to prison. Okay, that's a little extreme, and my story isn't always necessarily relatable. What I'm trying to do here is bring it back to a very simple reality that if you continue to say I am, you will become. So I think as far as my prison days go, the first time, that's it. After that first prison stint, I bribed my way out. I bribed all and sundry. I got released on bail, which was not allowed, but it's Africa, and I had enough money, or borrowed enough money, to bribe the right people. I got out. So for the next year, that was December 2018, up until August of 2019, I went to court every week and I fought the charges. One of the charges was, let's put it, was a real charge. I had to buy a piece of paper, and in Zimbabwe, I had to pay for it. I was a foreigner, and foreigners in Zimbabwe are required to be extorted by immigration. So you pay bribes constantly just to stay in the country, because that's the way the system works. The only way out of that extortion is to pay someone higher up and buy a piece of paper which releases you from the extortion of the lower level cronies. I bought that piece of paper just like every single Zimbabwean who was a foreigner did. The only difference was I made a big mistake in having a big mouth and being a crusader in a country that didn't want my opinion or my stance on corruption and theft. So it was used against me, and I was dragging the system. And that system today is still handing out those bits of papers. For $5,000 US, you can buy your residency from a corrupt politician in Zimbabwe without the blink of an eye. I did that, and because of my arrogance, because of my crusader notions, because I felt that because I was right, I had a distinct fight on my hands to change African politics, that I had a distinct right to tell them that corruption was wrong, theft was wrong, and I was going to be the living example of the way Africa should be. What a mistake that was. So after being released from prison end of December in 2018, I went to court till August 2019, where I paid bribes for the judges, bribes for the public prosecutors. My lawyer had bribed all the top immigration officials. The only person we hadn't been able to bribe was the minister at the time. He just refused to get involved, which bothered me, but my lawyer told me it was going to be okay. I was going to pay a series of fines in August. I would be sentenced and then released into the Zimbabwean prison system, and then I'd be just quietly ushered out the back door, able to go on with my life. So I think it was about August the 4th, I went to court dressed in my work clothes and thought it was just another day in court. I'd given my credit cards and everything to my lawyer to pay the fines. I was going to walk out that back door back to my kids. The night before, something grabbed my stomach, and I woke up at 10 o'clock at night, and I didn't sleep, and I sleep really well. I didn't sleep through from 10 p.m. that night until court the next day. And I just had this sneaking suspicion something had gone wrong. And it had. When I walked in, the judge had taken my bribe and been told what to say, and she chose not to say it. She handed me over for either a long prison sentence or immediate deportation. I chose the prison sentence because I wasn't leaving my kids. So I went from my nice little comfortable hut in the bush and my kids back into the prison cells. This time I went into Central, the big boy prison, before I was in remand. Same prison, just a different name. This time I was one of 2 white prisoners in a population of 3,800 in this section. So this was same as before, but intensified in the volume of people around me. So the energy was a hell of a lot worse. It was winter. It was cold. Whenever I hear anyone say they're cold, my gut takes me straight back to the evening I was checked into that prison, where I was given a blanket and the temperature dropped to about 2 degrees. I was in prison clothes this time. They stripped me of my civvies and they put me into their prison rags, and because I had such a big mouth and believed I was going to buy my way out again, they put me in the smallest prison rags you could find. There was not a lot you couldn't see. Not that I really gave a shit, because I was cold. I didn't care what you could or couldn't see. And yeah, I fought and I screamed and yelled and told them they were a bunch of thieving, lying human beings, and my arrogance went to a new level. I was buying my way out of this and they could all go to hell, and it was just a glitch in the system, and they laughed and I laughed, and eventually I started to realise after the 3rd day that my lawyer had set me up, and I was not walking away this time, and I was not paying my way out of it, and there was not a soul involved who was prepared to stick their neck out. The politics in Zimbabwe had gotten even worse, so the big business connections I had and the very people who I worked for put their tail between their legs, and they hid. And so I was left to the mercy of the Zimbabwe prison services. And again, what did I learn? Just how bloody strong I am. What did I learn? Just how healthy I was. What did I learn? Just how capable any human is in this circumstance. So this isn't necessarily a story about Aaron Young. It's a story about humans, full stop. We seem to have got to a point in our dim-witted evolution where we give up so easily. We don't want to take action. We don't like pain. We don't like discomfort. We don't like being challenged. We don't want anyone to disagree with us. We're emotional wrecks the bulk of the time. Now, much of this is not always our fault. We live in a society that is bombarded with fear, is bombarded with control mechanisms, is bombarded with mixed messages, and almost trying to get a fervour or a desire in us to fight with each other. So I'm not blaming you. This is not a case of me saying I'm better than. I'm just saying that once you go through these sorts of experiences, you understand how potently capable every single human being on the planet is. I survived this. Anyone else could. You've got no choice. You can't crawl into a ball and just give up. I was lucky that I got this experience because it taught me so much about what I'm capable of, which allows me to teach other people what they're capable of. I'm able to take you to places that you can't even dream of, all from the comforts behind your computer screen, or in a retreat, or in a workshop, or in a coaching call. But what is required of you, and this is where I'm getting at here, is that you take action. There is no medication, there is no chemical, there is no quick fix tool that is going to fix you or show you those capabilities. You've got to start to believe them for yourself. And that's why I share this story, because if I can do this, I came from an upbringing of drug abuse, trauma, abduction, following into my own lifestyle choices of crime, drugs, debaucherous behaviour and all that sort of shit. So if I can do this, if I can survive through this and thrive and come out the other side to be able to sit in front of this camera and talk about this and have a pure motivation, sincerity to guide other people through their daily problems, then so can you. And my way of looking at this is I share this so that I can create a genuine community of people who can offer their stories up freely, so that we don't have to look for these shitty role models anymore. We don't need to look up to these people selling us books and selling us YouTube and selling us something. That we can basically, each of us, walk around embodying very basic spiritual principles without the cliches and without the jargon, so that you can help just your family if need be, just your kids avoid the mistakes that you may have made. And the mistakes that when you look around you, society is quickly taking suit and jumping on board with without any thought. So I'm not sure how long I've gone, but I think it's way too long, guys. So there's a little bit about my prison stay. There's a lot more to it. I'd love to do a live talking about Ayeli and John, the guys that I clicked up with in prison, who were two of the most incredible human beings I've ever met in my entire life. The experiences I shared with these two men inside that prison were nothing short of life-changing. And I wouldn't be the man sitting here I am today if it wasn't for that Ethiopian and that man from South Sudan and the journey that we travelled through together while I did those 2 prison stints. So I'm going to leave it here. I hope someone got something from this, and I hope I get back on here and talk more about that prison stay. I talk more about Aeli and John. I hope I talk more about the mistakes I made while I was in there, but also how I've been able to respond to those mistakes and how I use them now in my life to help other people look at the little challenges in their life, grab hold of the things, spin them around in their hand and look at them from 5 or 6 different directions, take a big breath and respond to them instead of react to them. Find the lessons and the beauty, and then teach those people around you how to do the same thing. This is all about us each individually leading a better life. And when we lead that life and when we live it by example, people start coming out the woodwork, they start asking questions, and we all become teachers. We all offer the opportunity to share our knowledge and give that wisdom to someone else.